Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
God, it's great to be humble when you're perfect in every way. My name's Sherman. I'm a very grateful recovering alcoholic. Because I'm a member of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and by the grace of the power that I found in the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous, hadn't found it necessary to take a drink for 8,381 days today, one day at a time, and for this I'm very grateful. I stand here and take my watch off. I never really know why I do that. I guess it's so people will think I'm going to look at it and quit when it's time to quit. I never do look at it, though. I just put it down there in front of me and let it go. I'd like to start by thanking the committee for asking Barbara and I to be here. This is a real pleasure for us. Very seldom do we get to go somewhere and speak and participate in a program that we can get there in an hour and a half. We just live about 70 miles north and a little bit east of here, and it's a pleasure to be able to speak in our own country where we know so many people. I'm amazed when I look around the room and see the amount of people I know here tonight, and from all over northeastern Oklahoma, Oklahoma City, various other different places. I'd like to tell you that as soon as I get through tonight, after I'm through, you'll be in for one hell of a program. I know all the rest of the speakers. I've known Bunny for years and years and heard Bunny talk before. She got a great story. I've known Bob for a long, long time and heard Bob talk many times. Great story. I've known Tom for a long time and heard Tom talk many, many times. You're in for one hell of a great program. You have another speaker also that I've heard her talk for a long, long time. Heard her talking about 23, 24 years ago, and she was saying such things as, "You son of a bitch, you a real alcoholic." And I was saying such things as, "You crazy as hell." And we got to AA and Al-Anon and found out we were both right all the time. I'm amazed at how that come out. For those of you that don't know that speaker, I'd like for her to stand up. I'll probably talk about her a little bit. Barbara, would you stand up for just a moment? It's only by God's grace and the help of the AA program and the help of the Al-Anon program that Barbara and I are still together after some 26 or 27 years of marriage, and 3 or 4 of them drinking real heavy and fighting like hell, and finally she got in Al-Anon and I got in AA, and things got better in our life for some reason. It always amazes me how that took place. Most people that know me know that, or they tend to call me an AA fundamentalist. I'm not sure what an AA fundamentalist is. But if it's to love the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, then I'm probably a AA fundamentalist. If it's to love the Big Book Alcoholics Anonymous with all your heart, then I'm probably an AA fundamentalist. If it's to love your God as you understand Him with all your heart and all your soul, then surely I'm probably an AA fundamentalist. Because, you know, those are the 3 things that put me here tonight. If it wasn't for AA, the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, I would never have found the Big Book Alcoholics Anonymous. And if it hadn't been for the Big Book Alcoholics Anonymous, I never would have found a program, spiritual program designed to put me in touch with God as I understand Him. And surely if it wasn't for God as I understand Him, I certainly would not be here tonight. So mainly those are some of the things I'm going to try to talk about tonight. I'm not going to talk very much about my drinking. Those of you here that are alcoholic, you already know about all you need to know about drinking. There's not much I can tell you about it. Those of you that are here that have lived with we alcoholics, you know about all you need to know about alcoholism too. Probably you know more about our drinking than we do. I know Barbara knows more about mine than I do, because I don't remember a hell of a lot of mine. What I would like to talk about tonight is a little bit is my first drunk. I'd like to talk very briefly about what went in between that drunk and my last drunk. And then what I would really like to talk about is what happened to me after I came to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, because that's what's important in my life today. And like most of us as a kid growing up, it seemed like I was always on the outside of the crowd looking in, always wanted to be a part of, always knew I could not be, always knew that whatever I said, whatever I did would be the wrong thing. People would laugh and I would be embarrassed by it. And I remember so much as a teenager growing up that most of the guys that I ran around with, they were into things like athletics of different kinds. And I always wanted to be a part of that crowd and join in with what they're doing. But I've always been kind of short and a little bit on the chubby side, especially when I was a teenager. And I've always worn these glasses about as far back as I can remember. And I remember one time going up to the football coach and I asked him to let me try out for the football team. Now, it seems as though he kind of smiled and said, "Son, I'm sorry that the little short fat boys don't make very good football players. Why don't you go over and try out for the basketball team?" And I remember going to the basketball coach and asking him to let me try out for the basketball team, and it seemed as though he said, "Son, I'm sorry, but little short fat boys that wear glasses don't make very good basketball players. Why don't you go over and try out for the track team?" And again, I was always on the outside of the crowd looking in, wanting to be a part of and knew I could not be. Now, these guys also were doing some other things that I wanted to do. About that time in our lives, I would notice in school they would be walking down the hallway and they would have their arm around the girl and they would have that girl kind of pulled over against their shoulder and she would have her head laying on their shoulder looking up at them with those great eyes that you girls have. And I wanted to do some of that too. But I found out the little short fat boys that wear glasses didn't do any better with the girls than they did with the football coach or the basketball coach or any of the rest of them. Always on the outside of the crowd looking in, always wanting to be part of, knew I could not be. One night when I was about 14 years old, we went to an old high school dance, and the dance was out at an old dairy barn. The upstairs portion had been converted into a dance floor. The downstairs portion where the stanchion used to be, where they milked the cows, they had the tables and things where you could sit down and drink a Coke and etc. And I went to that dance that night, and I was standing upstairs where the kids were all dancing, leaning against the wall, watching the kids dance, and there was a little girl out there named Betty, and I'd been wanting to talk to Betty for a long, long time and try to do something with her, but I'd always been afraid to say anything to her because I knew that she would laugh and I would be embarrassed by it. And I told myself that night, as soon as this music stops, I'm going to walk over there and ask Betty to dance with me. The music stopped, and I began to walk toward Betty, and as I did, my mind began to say, "Charlie, what are you going to do if she says no? All these kids are going to hear her say no, and they're going to laugh, and you're going to be embarrassed by it." And my footsteps got a little slower, and by the time I got close to her, my mind said, "Well, Charlie, what are you going to do if she says yes? Now, you've never danced with a girl before, and sure as anything, you're going to step on her toes. She's going to scream. She's going to holler, and all these kids are going to see that, and you're going to be embarrassed by it." And my footsteps got slower and slower, and before I could get to her, another old boy grabbed her, and they started dancing. And I went back over against the wall, and I said to myself, as soon as this music stops, I'm going to ask Betty to dance with me. And the music stopped, and I began to walk toward Betty, and the same thing took place. My mind said, "What are you going to say if she says no?" And my footsteps got slower and slower, and my mind said, "What are you going to do if she says yes?" And my footsteps got slower and slower, and before I could get to her, another guy grabbed her, and they started dancing. And I went back against the wall, and I said to myself, as soon as this music stops, I'm going to go over there and ask Betty to dance with me. Now, about that time, a tall, slender guy that I knew came sidling up to me, and he said, "Charlie," he said, "how would you like to go outside with me and have a drink of moonshine?" Well, I'd never had a drink of moonshine, didn't even know what it was. But I was afraid to tell him no, because some other kids had heard him ask me, and I knew they would laugh and I would be embarrassed by it, so I said, sure, I guess that's okay. So we go downstairs and we go out to the trunk of the car, and he opens up the trunk and he reaches in and he pulls out a quart jar of moonshine. He takes a drink of this moonshine and he hands it to me. And I put that moonshine up to my lips, and as it passed over my lips, great things began to take place. Almost immediately my lips began to tingle and kind of vibrate a little bit. Struck my teeth and they kind of chattered up and down a little bit. Hit my tongue and I could almost immediately feel my tongue begin to grow and expand and swell. Hit my cheeks and they kind of fluttered in and out. And it began to pass up through my sinus cavities into my forehead, and I got a feeling in my forehead which was absolutely indescribably wonderful. Now, I haven't even swallowed the damn stuff yet. I've just got it in my mouth at the present time. As I swallowed that drink of moonshine, and it started down through my esophagus, several things began to happen at the same time. One is it felt like I was swallowing liquid fire. I'd never had anything burn like that as it went down. I gagged and I choked, and I thought I was going to absolutely die from lack of air. But also as it went on down through my esophagus, I began to feel my body begin to change. All of a sudden my chest began to grow and expand and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it hit my stomach and it just literally exploded like a bomb. Almost immediately I could feel it racing through my arms, and as it did, they got longer and longer, and it hit my hands and fingers, and they began to tingle and vibrate. At the same time I felt it racing through my arms, I felt it racing through my legs, and my legs got longer and longer, and I got taller and taller, and it hit my feet and toes, and they got a hot, intense, burning, exciting, get up and go somewhere and do something feeling. And this guy looked at me and he said, "Would you like to have another drink?" And from the tremendous height I'd already grown to, I looked down on his head and I said, "Yeah, I believe I'll have one more of those." And we took a second drink and we started back up those stairs, up to where those kids were dancing. As I went up those stairs, I felt a new freedom and a new happiness. I comprehended the word serenity and I knew peace. No matter how far down the scale I'd gone, I could see how my experience would benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity began to disappear. I lost interest in selfish things and gained interest in my fellows. Fear of people and economic insecurity began to leave me, and I felt good. And I walked up those stairs and I went back against the wall, and the kids were all out there dancing. And I said to myself, as soon as the music stops, I'm going to go ask Betty to dance with me. And the music stopped and I began to walk toward Betty, and this time my mind didn't say, "What are you going to do?" if she says no. Because I knew beyond any shadow of a doubt that Betty was going to say yes. And my mind didn't say, "Well, what are you going to do if she says yes?" Because I knew not only would she say yes, but I'd be able to dance with her and things would be great. And I walked right up to Betty and I said, "Betty, how would you like to dance with me?" And she looked at me kind of funny and she said, "Well, yeah, Charlie, I guess so. That'd be all right." And Betty and I began to dance, and sure enough, I didn't step on her toes, and sure enough, I didn't stumble and fall and make a fool of myself. And as the music came down in, I said, "Betty, how would you like to dance with me again?" And she said, "Well, yeah, great, Charlie, that's all right." She said, "I didn't even know you could dance." And I said, "Hell, I didn't either, but let's try it again." To the best of my recollection tonight, I don't believe anybody else danced with Betty the rest of that evening. I'm convinced in my mind tonight that she and I danced every tune until the end of the dance. And as we began to get close to the end of the dance, I found myself saying something I'd never been able to say before. I said, "Betty, can I take you home from the dance?" And she looked at me kind of odd, and she said, "Well, yeah, I guess that would be okay." Now, I didn't have a car to take Betty home in, but I knew a guy that had one, and he happened to be a tall, slender guy that had a quart of moonshine in the trunk of his car. And I went up to him and I said, "How about Betty and I riding home with you and your girlfriend? Betty's agreed to let me take her home, and I don't have any way to take her. Would it be all right if we rode with you?" And he said, "Well, sure, come on, that's fine." So he and his girlfriend and Betty and I, we go downstairs, and we get the quart of moonshine out of the trunk of the car, and we put it in the back seat, and he and his girlfriend get in the front seat, Betty and I get in the back seat. We had another little drink, and we started tooling it down the road. And as we rode down that road, my mind began to think. It said, "You know, you've asked this girl to dance with you," and she said, "Okay." And you've danced with her, and everything turned out all right, and you're taking her home from the dance. And I thought, I wonder what she would say if I would reach over and put my arm around her shoulder and pull her over against me, if she'd lay her head on my shoulder like they do in school. And I rode along and thought about that a little bit further, and I decided to do it, and I just reached over and took my arm and put it around Betty's shoulder and kind of nudged her over toward me, and she just laid her head on my shoulder and looked up at me with those great eyes like you guys do. And I thought, oh, my God, what you have really been missing. And as we rode a little further, I began to think some more. I thought, you know, I've asked this girl to dance with her, and I've got her in the back seat of the car and taken her home for the dance, and I got her head on my shoulder. I said, I wonder what she would do if I would kiss her. Well, now, I'd never kissed a girl before. I had no idea how to do it, except I had seen them do it in the movies. And I knew if you're going to kiss one of them, you need to get their face in just the right position. And then you lean down and you put your lips on theirs with your eyes closed. And then what happens after that, I had no idea. But we rode along a little further, and I thought about that some more. And I decided I would do that, and again I got Betty over against my shoulder and had her head laying down, and I reached over with my right hand and got her by the chin and got her face just right, or what I thought was right, and I leaned down, and as I did, I closed my eyes and I put my lips against hers. Well, I really didn't know what to expect. I thought maybe she would scream, maybe she would slap my face, but she didn't do that. In fact, she acted like she kind of enjoyed it, and just a few seconds I felt her little lips begin to move, and my little lips began to move, and there seemed to be a current of electricity flowing back and forth between us, and I thought, my God, you really don't know what you've been missing up till this point of life, you know. And we rode along a little further, and my mind got to thinking again, you know, and I thought, I've asked this girl to dance with me, and I'm taking her home from the dance, and I've got her in the back seat of the car, and I've got her head on my shoulder, and I've kissed her, and she didn't slap my face. I thought, I wonder what she would do if I would reach over there and get a hold of one of those things. Now, I didn't know any more about getting a hold of one of those things than I did about kissing, but I was pretty sure that if you're going to get a hold of one of them, you ought to be kissing them at the same time. So again, I reached and I got Betty by the chin, and I got her mouth just right, and I leaned down and put my lips against hers, but this time I didn't close my eyes because I wanted to see what my right hand was getting ready to do. And as I leaned down and kissed Betty, and her lips began to move, and my lips began to move, and all of a sudden I reached over with my right hand, and I got hold of one of those things. Now, let me tell you something. If you're a little short, fat, chubby 14-year-old boy that wears glasses, and you've been thinking about getting hold of one of those things for a long time, and you get one of them in your hand for the first time, I'll guarantee you I'd never felt anything like that before, and I'm not so damn sure I've ever felt anything like that since. I think that was my first spiritual experience right there in the back seat of that automobile. I think about it today, and my old right hand just gets to jumping up and down. Okay, we're not going to talk about Betty anymore tonight. People used to say to me, Charlie, why don't you tell the rest of that story? And I would always answer back, well, I really don't believe in talking about those things from behind the podium. But the real truth of the matter is I can't tell you the rest of that story because I don't remember the rest of that story. You know, as I was doing those things with Betty, those things that were so important to a 14-year-old boy, those things that were the most exciting things I'd ever done in my life, as I was doing those things with Betty, it seemed as though something within me kept saying to me, why don't you reach over there and get some more of that stuff in that bottle or in that quart jar? And I'd have to stop what I was doing with Betty. Even though it was the greatest thing I'd ever done before, I'd have to stop, reach over, get the quart fruit jar, and take a drink of that moonshine. And this went on several times throughout the night, and somewhere there I just simply passed out of the picture. Don't really know what took place between Betty and I. I have some vague memories of it, but really I can't tell whether they're true or false. You know, the big book says we can't differentiate the true from the false, and that's true in a hell of a lot of areas. That happens to be one I can't. I woke up next morning at home in my bed, and I didn't know how I got there. And I felt like hell, and I was sick as hell, and I began to think about what took place the night before. And today I realized that what happened to me the night before was the first thing that evidenced that I'm an alcoholic. For an alcoholic, we must have this thing called a physical allergy, or this thing that's referred to as the phenomenon of craving for alcohol. And after we once put a drink or two in our system, then the phenomenon of craving develops, and it is so strong that it overcomes the ability of the mind to control how much we're going to drink after we once started drinking. And alcohol then becomes paramount to all other interest. And the most interesting and exciting thing I'd ever done, I would have to stop it and go over and pick up the drink and drink some more and then go back to what I was doing. I think that night I evidenced a physical allergy, the first thing you got to have in order to be an alcoholic. Also, as I was lying in bed the next morning thinking about the night before, I was not thinking about the fact that I was sick this morning. I wasn't thinking about the terrible hangover. I wasn't thinking about the fact that I couldn't remember what had taken place the night before. My mind thought about one thing and one thing only. It thought about what that drink did for me. It thought about how it changed me from a kid that was absolutely scared to death From a kid that didn't fit in anywhere he went to a person that was able to function as a normal teenager in teenage society. I thought about how it made me feel as I walked back up those stairs. And I thought about how it made me feel as I walked across that floor to ask Betty to dance with me. The big book says men and women drink essentially because we like the effect produced by alcohol. You know, today I realize normal people don't feel that way whenever they drink. Today I realize that normal people, they have 2 or 3 drinks, and they seem to get a slightly tipsy, out of control beginnings of a nauseous feeling, and they really don't care much about drinking more than 1 or 2 drinks. But you see, my reaction to alcohol was abnormal physically, and it was also abnormal mentally. Most people, when they drink, they get the slightly tipsy, out of control feeling. Whenever I drink, I get an exciting, in control, let's get up and go to town feeling. Entirely different from what normal people feel, and I loved what alcohol did for me the night before. And I could hardly wait until I had an opportunity to drink again to see if that would happen to me again, and sure enough it did. Sure enough it did. I drank and it made me feel great, and it allowed me to do the things that I couldn't do whenever I wasn't drinking. And after you repeat success a few times, after a while it becomes embedded in the mind to the point that you really can't tell what's true and what's false, and the big book refers to that as an obsession of the mind. An idea that overcomes all ideas to the contrary. And my obsession of the mind with alcohol was so great that I was absolutely unable to differentiate the true from the false. The only thing I could ever see about alcohol is what it does for me. I could never see what it does to me. And I think that's the second thing you got to have to be a good alcoholic, to be able to believe that lie and not see what it does to us, but only what it does for us. Now, other people in my life from the very beginning could look at me and see my drinking and be able to tell the truth about it. I remember when I was about 16 years old, my mother said to me one day, she said, "Son, I need to talk to you about your drinking." She said, "Don't you know that you have an uncle in an insane asylum in the state of California?" And she says, "He's there because he's an alcoholic." And she said, "He drank so much he became an absolute wet brain, and he can't be released on the streets anymore. He has to be taken care of night and day." And she said, "I watched him start drinking." And she said, "Son, you're drinking just like him." And she said, "If you continue to drink the way you drink, you're going to end up in the same place your uncle is." And I said, "Oh, Mama, you don't understand." I said, "I'll never be like my uncle. If alcohol ever gets to be a problem in my life, don't you worry about it. I'll sure as hell quit drinking." The inability to differentiate the true from the false. Mother could see the truth about my drinking, but I couldn't see it. I was about 16 and a half, close to 17 years old, getting ready to graduate from high school. And my dad said to me one day, he said, "Son, I need to talk to you about your drinking." He said, "What I want to tell you is this." He said, "I've never seen a member of the Parmley family yet that could safely drink alcohol." He said, "I've got several brothers and sisters that have tried it." And he said, "I tried it at one time when I was a young man." And he said, "For every one of us, if we continue to drink, we destroyed our lives." And he said, "The same thing's going to happen to you if you continue to drink the way you're drinking." And I said, "Oh, Dad, you don't understand." I said, "I'm only half Parmley, and I'll never be like the rest of you Parmleys. Don't you worry about that. If alcohol gets to be a problem in my life, I'll stop drinking. Don't worry about it." The inability to differentiate the truth from the false. When I was 17 years old, I woke up in an army hospital in Bremerhaven, Germany. And there was a doctor standing at the side of my bed, and he said, "Son, I need to talk to you about your drinking." He said, "I don't know whether you know it or not, but," he said, "you've already died in this hospital twice in the last 3 days." And he said, "If you continue to drink the way you're drinking, you'll never live to see 30 years old." And I said, "Oh, doctor, you don't understand." I said, "I'll never drink enough to get in that kind of shape. If it gets to be a serious problem in my life, I'll stop drinking. Don't you worry about that." The complete inability to differentiate the truth from the false. My beautiful wife that I'd married when I was 21 years of age, she told me at about 25, she said, "Charlie, I need to talk to you about your drinking." She said, "I don't know what you're doing, and I don't know where you're going, and I don't know who you're with, but," she said, "I'm tired of you going out and getting drunk and laying out all night and coming in here smelling like hell." And she said, "You're a good husband, and I love you very deeply, and I don't want to divorce you," but she said, "If you continue to drink the way you're drinking, sooner or later I'm going to have to divorce you." And I said, "Oh, sweetheart, you don't understand. I drink this way because I have to. I drink this way because of the job. And if it ever gets to be a serious problem, I'll stop drinking. Don't you worry about that." The inability to differentiate the true from the false, fully feeling all the time that when I got ready to stop, that I'd be able to do so. My boss called me in one time when I was in my early 30s, and he said, Charlie, I need to talk to you about your drinking. He said, are you laying out at night, and you're coming in here in the morning, and you're smelling like booze? He said, you're one of the finest employees we got. And he said, I don't know whether you know it or not, but he said, you're slated to take my job when I retire in 2 years. But he said, if you continue to drink the way you're drinking, we're going to have to let you go. And I said, oh, boss, don't worry about that. If alcohol begins to interfere with my job, I'll stop drinking. Don't you worry about that. All of these people could look at me and look at my drinking, and they could see the truth about it. But as a practicing alcoholic, I simply could not see what alcohol was doing to me. I could only see what it did for me. And that was true with me from the first drink I ever took. Now, some 24 years after I took that first drink of moonshine from the back seat of that guy's car, out of a quart jar of moonshine, I came to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I came to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, a whole lot of those things they had been telling me had begun to come true. That mother and father who had thought so much of me had begun to lose all respect for me. That beautiful wife that I'd married when I was 21 years of age, she had already gotten enough of it, and she had filed for divorce. That great job that I had that I'd worked hard at for so many years to become a success had gone by the wayside. And another beautiful lady that I had married, and we had 3 children when I married her, and we'd had 1 child, I was beginning to lose those also, because this lady named Barbara had had enough of my drinking also. You see, somewhere down the line after the first divorce, I met Barbara, and Barbara and I fell immediately in love with each other. There was no question about it at all. It wasn't one of those things that go on for months and years and you decide you're in love. We fell in love the first night we ever met. Probably fell in heat too at the same time, you know. But and I loved old Barbara dearly. And Barbara and I had been married about 3 going on 4 years when I came to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, the reason I came to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous was not to get sober. The reason I came to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous was not to stop drinking. The reason I came to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, Barbara had filed for divorce 3 times within the last year. And every time she would file for divorce, she would go down to that attorney and they would write the papers up, and the attorney would say, go to the bank and get all the money out of the bank, because if he finds out you're divorcing him, he'll get the money first. And the next thing I'd know, I'd come off one of my drunks, and Barbara had filed for divorce and they'd put me out of the house, and all the money would be gone. Now, any self-respecting drunk knows in those situations what you have to do is talk them out of the divorce. So I would sneak back in the house, and I'd take a shower and put on a little sweet-smelling stuff, and I'd begin to talk to Barbara, and I'd say such things as, Barbara, you really don't understand what you're doing. You know, you've got these 4 kids, you'll never be able to take care of them by yourself, and you really don't know what you're about to get ready to. And I'd say the thing that always worked, if you will drop the divorce proceedings, and if you'll put the money back in the bank, then I'll stop drinking. And truthfully, that's all Barbara wanted to hear from me, that I would stop drinking. And sure enough, she would drop the divorce, she'd put the money back in the bank, I'd stop drinking. And then I'd run around for 3 or 4 weeks or 3 or 4 months sober, feeling like hell, wanting to feel better, and end up drinking again. Next thing you know, Barbara would file for divorce again. Now, after that 3rd divorce, Barbara had talked to her sister who lives in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And her sister had told Barbara about AA, told Barbara about Al-Anon, had sent Barbara some literature. And about the time Barbara got that literature was the 3rd divorce, and had already moved me out of the house, and I was living elsewhere. And I'll never forget, Barbara got that literature, and she read that literature, and she ended up going to an Al-Anon meeting. And I remember Barbara called me the next day, and she said, Charlie, how would you like to come back home? She said, I believe that you have an illness called alcoholism. And she said, I believe that the things you do is not because you don't love me and the kids. You're doing them because you have to. And she said, I really believe we could work our marriage out if you would like to come back home. Well, of course, I wanted to come back home. I had the home there with the kids in it, everything I owned tied up in it, and the farm and everything else, and I wanted to be back home, so I immediately went back. Now, I've always given Al-Anon credit for that. But I also think part of the reason was that this time, before I started on that drunk, I had gone to the bank and I'd got all the money out of the bank. And Barbara was filing for divorce, and she was flat broke. I think that might have had a little something to do with us getting back together. But really, I give the credit to Al-Anon when she found out what alcoholism really is. Now, I went back home, and I proceeded to stay sober for a period of time. Barbara proceeded to go to Al-Anon. Every once in a while, I'd have to get drunk. And every once in a while, when one of those drunks, I'd have to stop, and I'd have to think about, well, what are you drinking for? You know, after all, before, when I'd wanted to get drunk, I could pick a fight with Barbara, and that would give me a good excuse to get drunk, but Barbara wouldn't fight with me anymore. She really wouldn't talk very much about my drinking. She quit pouring it out whenever she found it. She quit giving me those dirty looks. And I had to start kind of looking at me and looking at why I was drinking the way I was drinking. And finally one day Barbara said, Charlie, how would you, she said, would you be willing to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous? She said, my sponsor, Wanda, her husband is in AA, his name is Floyd, and said, would you be willing to talk to Floyd if they came over to the house? And I said, well, yeah, I guess I would. Now, I really don't know why I agreed to that. I guess to keep peace in the family. I sure as hell didn't intend to stop drinking. And I remember the day they came to our house, and Barbara and Wanda got in the car, and they left, and Floyd and I sat down in my kitchen. And Floyd did for me that evening what nobody had ever been able to do before. Floyd sat down in my kitchen, and he began to talk to me about his drinking. Now, everybody that ever talked to me about drinking before had talked to me about my drinking. Barbara had talked about my drinking, the banker had talked about my drinking, my friend the sheriff had talked about my drinking, the attorneys had talked about my drinking, my brother had talked about my drinking. Floyd didn't seem to give a damn about my drinking at all. In fact, he kind of pissed me off before he got through because he wouldn't mention me. He just talked about him. And he talked to me about what alcohol had done to him. He talked to me about this strange physical thing that happens whenever we alcoholics take a drink. He talked to me about this phenomenon of craving, this thing called the allergy, that whenever he took a drink, it required he have a second and a third and an eighth and a tenth until he's drunk and sick and in all kinds of trouble. And then he talked to me about the times that he had tried to quit drinking and the times that he had sworn off, but sooner or later his mind would believe it's okay to drink, and he would go back and pick up that first drink and end up drunk all over again. And I was able to say, there's a guy that understands what's going on in my head and in my body. For the first time, I talked to somebody who understood. And Floyd said, would you go to an AA meeting with me? He said, there's a meeting in Siloam Springs, Arkansas on Friday night. And he said, I'll be glad to come by and get you if you'd like to go. And I said, well, yeah, I guess that's okay. Yeah, I'd go. And again, I don't really know why I went. I didn't go to get sober. I guess Floyd had got my interest enough that he made me want to find out some more about this thing called alcoholism. I always thought alcoholics were gutter drunks. I always thought they were no good bums. I always thought they were people unable to work. And I wasn't one of those, so I couldn't be one. But Floyd was evidence to me that that's not always true. And he got me interested enough to agree to go to a meeting with Alcoholics Anonymous. And on Friday night, we went to Floyd's house, and from there we went to the meeting. And I shall never forget what happened that night. I walked in the meeting of the Borderline Group in Siloam Springs, Arkansas. And I thought, what an appropriate name this is for this group. Because I'm a borderline alcoholic, and this is exactly where I fit in this group. You know, today I realize they call it the Borderline Group because it's on the Oklahoma-Arkansas border, but I didn't know that's it. I thought it was a group just for me. And I walked in the door, and there they all stood. And you guys, you all remember how they look when you go in there? You know, I expected them to be dirty, filthy people. I expected them to be a bunch of cripples. I expected the women to look like tramps. And they were all cleaned up, and some of them had suits and ties on, and the women looked great, and they smelled good, and I thought, my God, this cannot be Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know what I expected it to be. I thought maybe it was going to be a plainclothes Salvation Army or something like that. And I walked in there, and it's an entirely different bunch of people. And the thing that got me that night, and the thing that I hope I never forget, is every AA member in that room walked up to me and stuck their hand out and said, hello, Charlie, how are you? And they said, man, we're glad to see you. Have you been having a little trouble with alcohol? And I said, yes, I have. And I guess the reason I'm here is to find out what to do about it. And they proceeded to tell me. You know, one guy said, well, we suggest for a new member in AA, and it's not bad for an old member, but you ought to go to 4, 5, 6 AA meetings a week. He said, it seems as though every time we go to a meeting, we get our batteries recharged, and we're reminded we can't drink. And he said, you need to get to all the meetings you can possibly get to. And there was another guy standing there, he picked up a book, and he stuck it out at me, and he said, Charlie, this is the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said, in here is the story of how the first 100 of us recovered from alcoholism. And he said, if you will take this book and read it and study it and do what it says, you will never have to take another drink as long as you live if you don't want to drink. And there was a third guy in that room, and you see him at every AA meeting. He was an older guy, and he was bald-headed. I called him the old bald-headed poot, and I'll never forget him. He smiled like they smile, and he said, son, now I wasn't but 40 years old in those days, so I was a lot younger, and he said, son, if you really want to get sober and stay sober, someday you'll have to turn your will and your life over to the care of God as you understand Him. And I looked at these great people, and I said, you all are great people. And I love the way you've made me feel, and your coffee tastes pretty good. But I said, let me tell you something. I can't do those things you're telling me to do. I said, I can't come to 4 or 5 or 6 AA meetings a week. After all, I've got a chicken operation up here where I raise 45,000 broiler chickens. And I've got 100 head of cattle over here on this place. And I've got 30 sows on this place over here. And I've got a 500 hog feeder operation sitting over there. And I've got a red-headed wife and 4 kids and 2 bird dogs. And if you're going to take care of all that kind of mess, you've got to stay home and get your rest. There ain't no way I can come to 4 or 5 or 6 AA meetings a week. And I opened their book, and I went to where they told me to go, which was chapter 5, and I read how it works, and I damn near vomited. I had never admitted in my life I was powerless over anything. And I said, don't tell me I'm crazy. Don't tell me I'm insane. Yeah, I do some crazy, stupid things whenever I'm drinking, but when I'm sober, I'm like other people. There's no insanity in my life. And besides that, if you're not powerless and you're not insane, you don't need to be worried about turning your will and your life over to care of something you don't understand in the first place. And I looked at that old bald-headed poot and I said, don't tell me about God, because I already know about God. You see, I was born and raised in a good Southern Baptist church. And I'd heard about God all my life. And I'd heard about going to hell for lying and cheating and stealing and drinking whiskey and committing adultery. And by the time I got to AA, I'd been doing that for 26 years. And I knew that God had already told St. Peter, when that little four-eyed sucker gets up here, send him downstairs. We'll not need his kind. I don't need to know anything else about God. Don't talk to me about God. And I said, I can't do these things you people are telling me to do, but I said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to come to your AA meetings, and I'm going to come down here every Friday night, and I'm not going to miss a meeting, and I'm going to work this program the way I want to work it, and I'm going to stay sober. And if you don't believe me, you watch me. I'm getting ready to do that. Thank God for the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Any other fellowship in the world would have picked an arrogant little SOB like me up by the seat of my britches and thrown me right out the door. You know what they did? They just all reared back and smiled and said, keep coming back. And I did exactly what I said I'd do. I came to their meeting every Friday night religiously, and I didn't miss a Friday night, and I worked this program the way I wanted to work it. And as time went by, I got sicker, and I got sicker, and I got sicker, and I got sicker. And things wasn't right in my life, and I didn't feel good, and I couldn't get along with Barbara, and I couldn't get along with the kids, and I couldn't get along with the neighbors, and I couldn't get along with my cows, and I couldn't get along with my bird dogs, and I couldn't get along with nobody. And by God, I wanted to feel better, and I only knew one thing to make me feel better. And I'd been hearing them talk about having a slip, and one day I decided it's time for me to have one of those. And I took a drink knowing full well it would make me feel better. You know, the big book talks about the fact that we're restless, irritable, and discontented. And we're filled with shame, fear, guilt, and remorse unless we can again experience that sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a couple of drinks. And my mind would revert back to how the first 2 drinks made me feel. It will revert back to how it made me feel that night when I walked up those stairs into that dance hall. It will revert back to the thing that alcohol would do for me, never what it would do to me. And I would take a drink fully realizing and knowing that this time it's going to be okay. Couldn't remember the jailhouse, couldn't remember the divorce courts, couldn't remember none of that. I could remember only what it does for me. And I took a drink of it, and it triggered the allergy, and I ended up drunk in hell. And those days when I drank, I would have to drink until I just get so sick I couldn't drink anymore. And when I'd get so sick I couldn't drink anymore, I'd go to the liquor store and I'd get a case of beer to go along with my daily quart of vodka. And slowly, after a week or 2, I would taper off of the vodka, get on to the beer. And after another week or 10 days of beer, I would taper off of the beer, and I'd get sober. Hard as hell to do. Oh, God, I hope I never have to do that again. But I finally would get sober. And when I got sober, I did the only thing right I've ever done in my life. I went right back to the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I walked in the door of the meeting in Silo Springs at the Borderline group, and there they all stood. And they had their hands sticking out, and they said, hello, Charlie, how are you? They said, man, we're glad to see you back. Have you been having a little trouble with alcohol? I said, yes, I have, and I guess the reason I'm here is to find out what to do about it. And they proceeded to tell me. One guy said, we think for a new man, he ought to go to 4, 5, or 6 AA meetings a week. Another one said, here's the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. Take it, study it, do what it says, and you'll never have to drink. And the old bald-headed poot grinned and said, son, if you really want to stay sober, sooner or later you'll have to turn your will and your life over to the care of God as you understand Him. And again, I told these great people, you don't understand me. I said, I absolutely cannot do these things. And today, as I look back in my life at that time, I realize why I could not do these things is because I had not been defeated yet. You see, I could quit drinking. Now, it was hard for me to quit. And God, I was sick when I quit. But I could quit drinking by myself. And if you can quit drinking, then how in the hell can you be powerless over alcohol? And I said, I can't do these things, but I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to come to your meeting every Friday night. And I'm not going to miss a meeting. And I'm going to work this program the way I want to. And I'm going to stay sober. And if you don't believe me, you watch me. I'm getting ready to do it. And they all reared back and smiled and said, keep coming back. And I kept coming back, and I went to the meetings every Friday night, and as time went by, I got sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker. The first drunk, I lasted 90 days. This time, I went past the 90 days. I went past 120 days. I went past 150 days, and I was approaching 6 months. And I wasn't feeling a bit better than I'd felt before. In fact, I was feeling worse, and God, I wanted to feel better. And I only knew one thing to make me feel better. And I took a drink of it, and I got drunk, and I got sick, and I got in all kinds of trouble. And I got my beer and my vodka, and it took me about 8 or 9 weeks on the drunk. Took another 3 or 4 to taper off. And when I got off of this drunk, I did the only thing I've ever done right. I went right back to the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I walked in the door on Friday night at Solomon Springs, and they all standing there with their hand out. They said, hello, Charlie, how are you? They said, man, we're glad to see you back. You've been having a little trouble with alcohol? I said, yeah, I guess I have, and the reason I'm here is to find out what to do about it. And they proceeded to tell me. One of them said, you need to go to 4, 5, or 6 AA meetings a week. The other one says, take the book, read it, and study it, and do what it says. And that beautiful old bald-headed man smiled and said, son, sooner or later, you'll have to turn your will and your life over to the care of God as you understand Him. And I said, you people do not understand me. There's absolutely no way I can do these things. But I'll come to the meetings, and I'll work the program my way, and I'll stay sober. And if you don't believe me, you watch me and get ready to do it. And I went to the meetings every Friday night, and I didn't miss a Friday night. And 90 days went by, and 6 months went by, and 9 months began to approach, and I felt worse than I'd ever felt in my life. You see, today I know what was wrong with me. I didn't know then. The only thing that had ever made me feel good, I had taken it out of my life. The only thing that had ever allowed me to function normally with other people, I had taken it out of my life. The only thing I'd ever found that could do for me what I could not do for myself, I had taken it out of my life, and I had replaced it with nothing but the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous wasn't doing it for me. And I felt worse, and I felt worse, and I felt worse, and I felt worse, and finally I reached a point one day where I had one of 2 choices. Either take a drink or blow your brains out. I could no longer face life sober, living the way I was living. And I thought very seriously about blowing my brains out. But I really didn't want to die then, and I sure don't want to die today. And I thought the easier, softer way would be to take a drink. Now, I did not want to drink. And this time I knew what it was going to do to me. There was no failure to differentiate the true from the false. This time I knew that if I drank, I'd get drunk. And I knew if I got drunk, I'd be in a hell of a shape. But I would rather be drunk than feel the way I was feeling sober. And I took a drink, and I got drunker than hell. And after 2 or 3 or 4 months of drinking, I finally got down to where I couldn't drink anymore, and I went back to the liquor store, and I got my beer and my vodka. But this time it didn't work. I'd try to drink that beer, and it would be just like drinking so much water. And I'd be so sick I would have to feel better, and I'd have to drink some vodka. And I'd drink that vodka, and then after a while I'd pass out. And then after a while I'd wake up, and I'd be shaking and sick and trembling and not feeling good at all and wanting to feel better and not knowing how to feel better, and take another drink of vodka, swearing this would be the last drink I'll ever take, and I'd pass out again. And finally Barbara and the kids moved me into the old utility room in the house. And I remember after I'd been laying in that utility room trying to take care of my chickens and my hogs and my cattle and everything else and trying to drink at the same time, after 3 or 4 weeks of that, Barbara stuck her head in that room one day and she said, hon, you're sick, aren't you? I said, yes, I am. She said, have you got anything left to drink? And I said, no, I'm out. And she said, I'll be back in just a little while. And maybe 30 minutes or an hour later, I really don't remember how long, Barbara walked in that utility room with a brown sack completely full of pint bottles of vodka, all different flavors. And she said, "Here, you love this more than you love anything else, and you need it." Now, for years, I gave Al-Anon credit for that also and thought she did that out of the goodness of her heart. Today, I realize she'd already been taught, let him drink all he wants to drink. Until he reaches bottom, nobody can do anything for him. And he'll do one of two things. He'll either die or he'll ask for help. And in either case, her problem would have been solved. So she was simply helping me get to the bottom. And I remember looking at those pint bottles of vodka, and I thought, my God, I've got enough to do for a month. And it seemed like a day or two later, I'm out of vodka again. And the days went by, and finally I got to where I couldn't eat. And then I got to where I couldn't sleep, and drink vodka and pass out, and drink vodka and pass out. And one morning I woke up with the full knowledge that I'm laying in this utility room and I'm dying from alcoholism. And if I don't do something about it, I'm going to die just sure as anything. And I didn't want to die drunk. Oh, my God, I did not want to die drunk. And I remember turning to Barbara and said something I'd never said before in my life. I said, "Barbara, I've got to have help. I can't quit drinking." And that's all Barbara wanted to hear. And she went to the phone and she called Floyd. And it seemed as though it was a matter of just minutes. And Floyd and a big tall fellow named Bus Hester, an old rough, tough telephone line repairman, walked into my utility room and me laying there sick and drunk. And I remember Floyd looked at me and he said, "Come on, Charlie, let's get you cleaned up. And let's take you where you can get some help." And I looked at those two beautiful guys and I said, "No, fellas, I don't believe I'm that bad. I think I can do this my way." And I remember Bus looked at Floyd and said, "If that's the way he really feels, there's nothing we can do for him." And he said, "Let's go home." And as they started to leave, Floyd stuck his head back in the door, and I remember him today with tears coming down his cheeks, and he said, "Charlie, when you need me, call me." And they left. And I laid in that room, and I tried to drink some more, and I tried to drink some beer, and I tried to feel better. And as some time passed, I don't know, an hour, 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't really know. Finally, some way, somehow, I managed to get to the phone. And I called Floyd, and I said, "Floyd, I can't quit. I need help." And he said, "I'll be right there." And Floyd came to my house, and I was sitting on the front porch, and I had a can of beer sitting there, and I had been drinking out of that can, and it was about half full. And Floyd got out of his pickup, and he said, "Come on, boy, let's go to the hospital." He said, "Bring your beer, and you can drink it on the way." And I said, "I don't want any more. I've had all I can stand. I'm through with it." And I left that house with that half a can of beer sitting on that front porch. Now, I drank for 26 years. That's the only drink I ever remember that I walked away from that day. And Floyd took me to the hospital, and in the hospital they gave me the proper medication to ward off the DTs and the convulsions and the things that go with it. And I don't really know what happened in there. I have some vague recollections of being tied down, and I have recollections of a lot of screaming and hollering and carrying on, but I really don't know what took place. I woke up in there about 3 days later, and I woke up in a place I'd never been before. Not in my body, but in my mind. I woke up in a place of absolute, complete defeat. I have no trouble identifying with Bill Wilson, the big book Alcoholics Anonymous, when he said, "No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master." And I knew, laying in that bed, that if I left that hospital, I was going to drink. And I knew if I left that hospital and I drank, I was going to die from alcoholism, and I did not know what to do about it. It's hard for me to imagine today somebody being in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous for 18 months, and when I reached bottom, I didn't know what to do about it. But I remember what one old boy had said in AA, not my old friend the bald-headed poot, but another one had said, "If you ever reach a point of complete desperation and you don't know which way to turn," he said, "try a prayer and see what happens." And I remember laying in that bed looking up at the ceiling and saying, "Do I dare pray?" And my mind said, "No, you're not going to pray. Only weak people pray.
Strong people stand on their own 2 feet, and they don't need to be praying to something they don't believe in anyhow. And my mind said, well, what are you going to do if you don't? And my mind said it wouldn't do any good. Based on what you've been and what you've done, God's going to have anything to do with you. And my mind said, but what are you going to do if you don't? And after a while, my mind played a trick on me. It said, Charlie, there's nobody else in this room but you. And you could pray, and if it didn't work, nobody would know you had done it, because nobody's going to see it or hear it. And I remember looking straight up at that ceiling and uttered a false prayer, if there ever was one. I said, God, if there is a kind and a loving God, can you remove from me the obsession to drink alcohol? I have no idea what happened. I wasn't like Bill that time. I didn't feel as if the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. I didn't see a blinding flash of light. But I know one thing. The instant I uttered that prayer, I knew I never had to take another drink. As long as I lived, if I didn't want to. Now, I didn't know how I was going to go about not doing that, but I knew that if I didn't want to drink, I'd never have to drink again. And I left that hospital, and that was on about a Thursday. And on Friday, I did the only thing I've ever done right in AA. I went right back to the meeting at Siloam Springs. And there they all stood. They had their hands sticking out. And they said, hello, Charlie, how are you? They said, man, we're glad to see you back. You've been having a little trouble with alcohol? And I said, yes, I have. And I didn't ask them what to do about it, and they didn't tell me what to do about it. I started going to 4 or 5 or 6 AA meetings a week. I got the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and I began to read it and study it. I began to ask this God that I did not understand and really do not understand today, each morning to give me one more day of sobriety. And I began to thank Him at night when I went to bed for that day of sobriety. And that's been over 8,000 days ago. And I've never had a desire to drink since that time. Now, I think what happened to me is this. I think when I was able to admit defeat, when I was able to admit that I was powerless over alcohol, that my life had become unmanageable, when I was able to really fully understand the fact that I do have an illness, and that illness is an illness of the body called a physical allergy, and an obsession of the mind that tells me I can drink when it's obvious I can't drink. I think I finally realized that if you can't drink without getting drunk and sick, and you can't stay sober, then you've become absolutely powerless over alcohol, and if you're going to recover from that, you're going to have a power greater than you are. And I found out that that power greater than I was in this big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, would restore me to sanity. And I found out in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, sanity was not the crazy, stupid things I did while drinking. I found out that the insanity that I was suffering from was this crazy, insane idea that just before I drink, that this time it's going to be okay. Has nothing to do with what happens to me after I get drunk. It's believing I can drink when it's obvious I can't. And I found out this power would have to restore me to sanity by working through the mind, that they could do nothing about my physical allergy. And I found out that step 3 was nothing more than making a decision regarding that power. If I'm powerless, I need the power. And if I need the power, then I'm going to have to start doing something about the finding of that power. And the first thing I found that I had to do to find that power was to make a decision to find that power. Now, I thought for a long time that in step 3 I turned my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand me. But finally I began to realize I didn't turn it over in 3. I simply made a decision to do so. One day in reading from this great book I have in front of me, I found that even though that decision was a vital and crucial step, it would have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things within myself which blocked me off from carrying out that decision. I found out I was going to have to take an inventory in step 4. And I didn't know what that inventory was until finally I realized there's certain things within my mind that has always blocked God out. Resentment was one of them. Fear of what's going to happen and people and places and things was always one of them. And the things that I had done in the past to hurt other people created guilt and remorse in my mind, and those things had effectively blocked God out of my mind. And if I wanted God to direct my thinking, I'd have to do something about their removal. And before I could do anything about their removal, I had to put them down on a piece of paper. And I found out that resentment was the number one offender, that it blocked God out more than anything else. There's no way that God could direct my will in my life as long as my mind was filled with resentments. And this great book showed me how to look at them. It showed me not only how to look at them, it showed me how to see where they came from. It showed me that they came from a threat to some of my basic instincts of life, and that if I didn't do something about this, I would always be filled with resentments. It showed me how to get rid of them, and it showed me what I would have to do to keep them from coming back in the future. And I found in step 4 that fears did the same thing to me, and it showed me how to look at these fears honestly, and how to see where they came from, and how to do something about their removal, and how to keep them from coming back. It showed me how to look at the guilt and the remorse associated with the people I'd hurt in the past, and how to do something about that. And it said, Charlie, take these things you have found and talk about them to another human being. There's no way I can be honest with me. Certainly when I was taking step 4, I could be as honest as I could be. But when you live 26 years of lying and cheating and stealing and doing the things that we do as alcoholics, we learn to live a dishonest life. And it's very difficult to be honest. It's to take them to another human being, one who's walked this walk before, and let that human being help me see those things about me I can't see. And I was amazed when I did this. And I found out that the root causes of my problem was that I had become a very selfish, very dishonest, very self-seeking, frightened individual, and a very inconsiderate human being. And I continually did things that hurt other people, and then they would retaliate and create pain and suffering for me, and then I would be filled with resentment and fear and shame and guilt and remorse. And for the first time, I could see what I had truthfully become during my years of drinking, and I didn't like what I saw. And I saw if I stayed that way, I would continue to do the same things I'd always done, continue to hurt people, and that they in turn would continue to retaliate, and sooner or later resentment and fear and shame and guilt and remorse blocks me off from God, and I get drunk. So I started working on those things in 6 and 7, and I was absolutely amazed to find out that if you start living unselfishly, just automatically you feel better. I found out that if you start considering what other people need and what other people want before you do yourself, automatically you get along better with people. I found out if you practice courage instead of fear, it builds your self-esteem and you feel better. And for the first time in my life, I was sober and I was beginning to feel good. I was 40 years old. I was going on 42 then. And it was the first time in my life I'd ever been sober and felt good. Ever been relatively free of fear, resentment, and anger and that crap. And I loved the way I felt. And it said, okay, now do something about the guilt and the remorse. And I took steps 8 and 9. And one day I woke up to the fact that the first 9 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous has given to me the same feelings I had that night when I was 14 years old and took that drink and walked up those stairs. I began to know a new freedom and a new happiness. I began to comprehend the word serenity, and I began to know peace. I began to lose my fear of economics and other people, and I began to be sober and feel good for the first time in my life. And my God, I wanted some more of that. Oh, I wanted some more of that. And my book tells me you can't stay where you are. It says it doesn't make any difference how great you've grown spiritually, that if you don't continue your spiritual growth, you'll have to start slipping back and regressing. And it said, now let's look at 10, 11, and 12. And I found out 10, 11, and 12 are not maintenance steps. I found out they are growth steps. Step 10 says we continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And when these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them, discuss them with someone immediately, and make amends quickly if we've harmed anyone. And one day I realized step 10 is nothing more than the working of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 on a daily basis. The very steps that gave me the growth, that gave me the promises, If I use them on a daily basis through step 10, I will continue my growth, and my relationship with God, myself, and my fellow man becomes better and better and better. Step 11 tells me to seek through prayer and meditation to improve, not maintain, to improve my conscious contact with God as I understand Him. And as I practiced those things, I had what I think is the greatest promise in AA. One day I woke up to the fact that, hey, I'm not what I used to be. Something has taken place in my life. Bill tells us in the 12 and 12, there's as many spiritual awakenings as there are people in AA today. But he said all of them got certain things in common. And he said that is that we are able to feel and believe and do things we could never do before on our own strength unaided. Now, if that's the criteria for spiritual awakening, surely I've had one of some kind. You know, I feel things I've never felt before. I feel love, patience, tolerance, and goodwill toward my fellow man. I never felt any of that before AA. Oh, you could have some after I got what I wanted, but I came first, and to hell with everybody else. I don't feel that way anymore. I believe things I never believed before. I believe that God is a kind and a loving God. I believe that He stands ready to help any human being anywhere in the world the instant they're ready to give up on self and turn to Him. I do not believe He's a punishing God. Oh, thank God He isn't a punishing God. If He was the God of justice that I thought He was, I wouldn't be standing here tonight. Surely He's a God of love. Surely He's a God of mercy. I can do things I could never do before. By golly, I can stay sober. I never could do that before. And because of the fact that I'm sober, I'm allowed to do many, many things I could never do while drinking, and I'm allowed to do the greatest thing I've ever done in my life, and that's to carry this message to other alcoholics. God's always told the human race, you only got to do two things to be happy. One thing He said is, put no other gods before me. That could be money, power, prestige, sex, or anything else. And then He says, do what you can for your fellow man. I think we people in this room tonight that are alcoholics are the luckiest people in the world. You know, I'm convinced in my mind today that in the 1930s, God got tired of seeing people like us die. And I think God used Bill and Bob, the first 100, and Dr. Ewing, Silkworth, and all the rest to put this thing together so we could have it today. God's always worked with people through people. He seldom speaks to one of us direct. Now, all the first 100 are gone. And if He worked with people then surely He keeps working with people today. There isn't an alcoholic in this room tonight that should even be here. Every one of us ought to be dead. Some of us 2 or 3 times, and we said, my, wasn't we lucky last night? No, I don't think luck had anything to do with it. I think God picks you out. I think He lets you suffer your alcoholism so you can learn what He wants you to learn. And then when He's ready to use you, He removes the obsession to drink. You know, they tell me that 97 out of 100 of us today are going to die from alcoholism, not even knowing we're alcoholic. About 3 or 4% of us stumble into AA. Less than half of us are recovering. I used to say, God, why am I an alcoholic? Today I say, God, why am I not one of those that's dying? Surely He has a purpose for us, and that purpose to me is to carry this message of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, this message of the recovery contained within the 12 steps. For a long time I worried about how it works, finally got that figured out, and then I got to worrying about why it works. Tonight I think I've figured out why it works. My book tells me this is a design for living that really works under all circumstances. And I've heard all my life about the 3 dimensions of life, the spiritual, the mental, and the physical. And my book tells me that we were sick in all 3 of those areas. Now, we're going to have to live with God whether we like it or not. If God dwells within each of us, as our book tells us He does, and we're going to have to live with Him. The only question is, do we do it with harmony or disharmony? I had been in complete disharmony with God as far back as I can remember. I think 1, 2, and 3 put me right with God. It put me in a proper position. When I could admit defeat, when I could see the need for the power greater than human power, when I could make the decision to go for that power, that's when I got right with God. He's the director. I'm the follower. All of us have a mind. Whether we like it or not, we got one. We act like we don't sometimes, but it's there. The only question is, do we live with it in harmony or disharmony? There's never been anybody in sicker in their mind than I was. Never satisfied with where I was. Never doing the things I felt I should be doing. Always screwed up. I think 4, 5, 6, and 7 got me right in my head. That's the first time I ever looked at me truthfully. That's the first time I saw what was wrong with me, not her, but me. That's the first time I'd ever begun to change my character through the help of a power greater than I am, and I started to get welded by head. And I think if I'm right with God and I'm right with me, then maybe I can go get right with my fellow man. I always thought the physical dimension was just my body. No. It's the entire material world. It's my relationship with the world and everything in it. Nobody ever screwed that up any worse than I did. Through steps 8 and 9, I got right with my fellow man. Now that's the design for God that God intended for me to live in the first place. To live with the Spirit, to live with myself, and to live with my fellow man. And if I'm well in all 3 areas, then I got to be feeling pretty good, and that's why the promises come after step 9, not after step 5, after step 9. I'm right with God, I'm right with me, and I'm right with my fellow man. Now, Bill talks twice in the big book about another dimension of living, a 4th dimension they never dreamed existed. And I really believe tonight that's what 10, 11, and 12 is all about, to continue this spiritual growth. To better my relationship with God, to better my relationship with me, to better my relationship with my fellow man, and surely if I continue to do that, then I'm going to feel better and better and better. And tonight I'm into a dimension of living that I never dreamed existed. Never had any idea you could live this way. God, I didn't know you could be sober and be relatively free of fear. I didn't know you could be sober and not have to make a bunch of decisions. I didn't know you could be sober and practice love, patience, and tolerance and not have to be resentful toward people, places, and things. I did not know you could exist that way. That's the 4th dimension of existence. You can't explain it. You can only feel it. I have to do one more thing, and then I'm through. My step 12 tells me that I need to practice these principles in all my affairs. What are these principles? I think it's obvious. Bill in How It Works says, no one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. What did he set down just before that statement? The 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. In the foreword to the 12 and 12, he says the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous are a set of principles spiritual in nature. Every time I've seen him mention the principles in writing, it's been in connection with the 12 steps. Now, it's easy for me to practice these principles, these 12 steps within AA. I love you. Hopefully you love me. And we're going to do our best not to hurt each other. But I'm only in AA an hour or 2 a day. What do I do the other 22, 23 hours? Can I practice these principles in my home with my spouse? Can I realize how powerless I really am over her? Can I realize the absolute insanity of still trying to control her, knowing full well I can't? Can I make a decision to turn her will and her life over to the care of God as I understand Him? Can I inventory me and see why I keep doing those things, knowing I can't? Can I talk about that to another human being? Can I have God be willing to and ask God to remove those character defects? Can I make amends to her quickly when I've harmed her? There's times I'm ashamed of me. There's times I treat absolute strangers on the street with more courtesy than I treat my own spouse in my own home. If I could practice these principles there with her, then I might be happy, peaceful, and free, not only in AA, but 8, 10, 12, 14 hours a day in my home. Can I practice them with my children? Can I realize how powerless I am over them? The insanity of trying to control them? Can I make that decision regarding them? If I could do that with my kids, what time we have together is good times. If I don't do it, we're at each other's throat continually. Maybe I could be happy there an hour or two a day. How about on the job? Can I realize how powerless I am over the co-workers? Can I realize the insanity of trying to control them and everything? If I could do that there, I might be happy another 8 or 10 hours a day on the job. Aren't we really saying that through these principles of Alcoholics Anonymous, that you and I have a way to not only be sober, but to be peaceful and happy and free, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, if we wish to? My old sponsor used to say to me, Charlie, you can be just as happy as you want to be, and I said, bullshit, you can't. Today I find myself saying to people, you can be just as happy as you want to be. We have a set of principles designed to bring that about in our lives without having to drink alcohol to do so. Most people out there are sick. Most people are going to the grave sick. We have the opportunity to live 2 complete lifetimes within one lifetime. I think we're the luckiest people in the world. Now I ask you a question. Do I love the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous? You know I do. Do I love the big book Alcoholics Anonymous with all my heart? You know I do. Do I love my God as I understand Him with all my heart and all my soul? You know I do. Do you think I'm an AA fundamentalist? I think I am. I hope I stay that way. Thank you all for listening to me tonight.